Let's say if Todd had done this, he's then sent his 13-year-old child to go and discover his mother's body.
Yeah.
Like how...
Absolutely.
How horrendous is that? Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events, and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Grave Secrets. We're your hosts, I'm Annie.
And I'm Beth. I nearly wooed then and then I realised I had to say Beth. We have another case study for you today. This episode has become, especially in American kind of headlines, because, spoiler, it is an American case, quite high profile. And I think it's primarily because of the amount of circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, I really enjoyed researching this one actually because I just thought it was an interesting one in general, wasn't it?
I think it's fascinating. And then there's also the element of like, can you ever really be sure with things like this? We'll get into it, obviously, but it was one of those where you just think, oh, when they say about the without reasonable doubt.
Was it or wasn't
it? Can you be certain? I just thought I wouldn't like to have been on the jury in this case.
No, I wouldn't.
So although there were a lot of witness testimonials in this case, there was a distinct lack of forensic evidence, and I think some of the cases we've covered recently have had really strong forensic evidence.
They have, and that's sort of what really stands up in court, isn't it? And I feel like, especially when there's a jury there, if the forensic evidence is in front of them, it's hard to dispute because it's there in black and white for you to look at. If you've got DNA, if you've got fingerprints, if you've got blood. But when you haven't got that and you're sort of judging the person, aren't you? And thinking, could this person do that from being stood on the stand? And I think that is such a hard position to be put in as a jury. Yeah,
and we do actually, I'm going to reference a couple of the jury members at the end of the episode, so you will get to hear, not directly from them, but a little bit about what they said.
Yeah.
So we're going to get stuck in straight away on this one. We're not going to give you any background information. We're just going to tell you about the events that unfolded on November 10th in 2018. So bad at numbers.
Yeah.
November
it's always
10th.
The dates, isn't it, that we get muddled up on.
Before we start every episode, I'm like, November 10th? November 10th.
I know, we say it to each other, and then when we come on, we usually say the wrong date anyway.
Okay, so on the morning of November 10th, in Earlville, Iowa, a man rang 911 frantically stating that his wife had, he kept referring to it as a fork, fallen on a fork, and that she was unresponsive, not breathing, and had no pulse. He was saying on the call, the dispatcher, again, we've kind of criticised in the past sometimes in America. But I think this one sent pretty level-headed.
She did. And when I listened to this one, I thought, this was different from the others that we've listened to. And she was. And they're referring to this fork a lot in the call. And it is a very frantic call, isn't it?
Yes.
And we later find out it's a farmer that's actually reported the incident. And a fork he's talking about is like what they called
a corn rake.
Corn rake, that's the one. It's like a big rake with I think it's got 4 or 6
so there's 4 prongs to it, but rather than like with your usual kind of garden rake where right at the end the prongs tilt slightly inward, so you've maybe got an inch or two for you to actually obviously gather up the leaves. In this case, there's a lot longer of that kind of twist in the rake. And the prongs are longer on the end. On the end, when they've tilted upright, are probably double the length, I would say. They look like 4 or 5 inches
Yeah.
And they come to more of a point because obviously they're designed to kind of get through big hay bales.
Yeah.
Or corn.
Yeah, for farming. So
Yeah.
it's an actual farming
Tool.
instrument. Yeah.
Yes.
Tool. Yeah, tool's
Yeah.
better.
So on the call, it's the husband that is saying that his wife has been injured. He kind of gives an account of what may have happened. He's basically saying that he believes that she must have tripped and fallen on the rake. And he states in the call that he actually took the rake out of her.
Yeah.
But then when they're on the call, at that point she's like, "Where are you?" The dispatcher's like, "Where are you?" And he says, "I got in the truck. I put her in the truck. We're driving to the hospital now." So they haven't made the call until they're in the truck.
Yeah. And you can clearly hear that they are in the truck on the 911 call.
Yeah.
It's not like they've done it and been advised to do that. And I thought with the rake as well, when he said, "I pulled it out," I thought, should you do that? Because if it's hit like a major artery or something, you pull it out, that might make the bleeding worse.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? The one thing I know, if I've learned anything in life, is that if you ever get impaled by something,
don't just pull it out.
Pull it out. In fact, we were talking about this at work the other day, because we were saying with kind of stab wounds and stab injuries from knives, I think people do know that generally speaking, well, in all cases, you don't pull it out, you leave it where it is. Whereas in other attacks, when things like a screwdriver, for example, has been used, I think because it's a smaller puncture hole, you would be more tempted to potentially pull it out.
Yeah.
Because you don't think of the impact. But actually, it's probably a deeper wound at that point. So again, you absolutely shouldn't.
But then I thought with the size of this rake that we've just looked at, like if someone's fallen on it and it's sort of impaled, how would you get that out of someone?
I know.
That must take
you have to
a lot of
physically,
force.
and imagine pulling it from your wife.
Yeah. So like I didn't know if he'd pulled it out in a panic. 'Cause when you see something like that, you must think like, oh my God, like that's awful. First reaction is to take it out and try and help.
I do think in any case, you would just think like, don't move.
I think you just ring 911 and ask them and get them to advise on it. So I probably wouldn't have moved her at all. I wouldn't have even took her like in the car.
No. So the husband does then say that they are in the truck and that his wife is actually on the back seats of the truck, basically in the son's arms, because it then becomes clear that one of their sons was actually present at the time. And he does reference that his son actually found his mother, which is just horrific, and we'll talk more about that.
I thought that, it's awful.
You can't even imagine. And then to have your mum bleeding obviously very heavily in the back of this truck.
And you're probably panicking.
On 911, like on the call.
Yeah.
Just absolute chaos, really, on the call. But he does then keep stating that his wife is unresponsive. So the dispatcher then says, "Can you please pull over and try and give CPR?" So the husband is like, "Yes, I'll do anything. I'll try CPR." And you can hear him like heavy breathing.
Yeah, and she's saying like now, ain't she? And he's pumping, and then like, and you can hear him sort of counting it out, like 1, 2, 3, 4. He's doing it like on, and it does sound like he's carrying it out, doesn't it? At that time,
because again, we've listened to other cases where you're like,
are they actually doing anything?
Yeah. What's happening?
They're just going 1, 2, 3, 4. But he was like panting.
Out of breath.
Yeah.
And at that point, he then does state or say that she's cold to the touch, which obviously is not a good sign.
But if she's cold to the touch, that means that, because obviously the body temperature would cool down gradually. Like if she's got cold so quick, I mean, like, how long has it been? At this point,
I know,
because you don't just go cold, do you?
No. So at that point, a dispatcher had obviously already called for someone to respond. So an officer did come out to the scene. He reported that he saw the son kind of flag them down as to where the mother was, and she was at that point rushed to hospital. She was actually rushed to a hospital that she used to work at, so it was the Manchester, Iowa hospital.
Yeah.
And it was at that point that her kind of, or the family's identity was revealed or
Yeah.
it was the first time that anyone kind of knew who they were.
Yeah, so this happened on a farm, and I didn't realise how many farming accidents there actually are. It's really dangerous. Like, when I was looking at the ones that had been reported, there is so many accidents that can happen on a farm. So this happening, when I first thought she'd fell on a rake, I thought, well, how would you really do that? But then I thought, even if you just trip and stumble and fall, and there's things around like that, you can easily get injured. And farming accidents in this location were pretty common just because it was such like a rural, farming. Was it a town? Place?
Fun fact for you. In another life, when I used to do marketing, we used to do marketing for a health and safety consultant.
Right.
Very fun. And farming and agriculture accidents are the highest cause of death in the UK as well.
Oh, wow.
Or lead to the biggest workplace-related injuries. It might not be highest cause of death in the UK. I think that's probably wrong, but definitely workplace related injuries. Yeah, agriculture and farming is the biggest one. And just in the village that I was from, growing up, as if I'm not near there now, there was a farmer that lost his arm.
Wow.
And then one that lost his life. Just both farming related accidents.
Yeah,
so
I didn't realise how much. I mean, I'd not really thought about it to that extent, but then how much machinery and equipment you're around, it makes sense, doesn't it?
And I think you do become it's like with anything, isn't it? It's like you become more blasé.
Yeah.
The more that you're around it. Like they say that with car crashes, you're more likely to crash closer to home because it's the most familiar.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a similar principle where, you're just doing what you do day in, day out. You're not really.
You're sort of on autopilot, aren't you? Yeah.
But yes, so it was actually the Mullis family that were involved in this case. So it was the husband was called Todd. Stutter there. The husband was called Todd Mullis, and then it was his wife Amy Mullis who was actually injured and that had suffered the accident. As I mentioned, Amy had actually previously worked at that hospital, so they knew as soon as she came in who she was. And it was actually, so there was a man called, his surname was Thompson. He was the medical director of the emergency services department for the hospital. And he was told that she'd been involved in a freak accident, but that unfortunately, due to the injuries and the massive amount of blood loss, that she had passed away.
And she was only 38, wasn't she?
Yeah.
It wasn't like she was... for some reason, when we first started this case, I thought she was a lot older.
Yeah, no.
And then I thought, 38, she's only 2 years older than me.
Gosh.
I know. That's what I always think now, is relate it back as in my own age and think, wow,
that's awful.
Yeah.
So we'll give you a little bit of context about the family. So Amy and Todd had actually met in 2003. They'd actually met at Delaware County Fair, which I imagine being this huge county fair like you hear in... you're watching
TV.
programmes and stuff. And again, in the case that we covered, the Arkansas family murders, she was at a gig, but I somehow imagined it was a similar situation where it's a lot of fields and bars and outs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they'd met in 2003, and by 2004, just a year later, the couple had actually got married. So Amy had actually moved onto Todd Mullis's farm, and he'd owned that since 1999. So it was quite a well-established farm.
So had he always been a farmer?
I think his family were in farming anyway, and then he'd built this
and
up
it's just
himself.
Sort of passed,
because the farm was huge. It was like the size of 2 football fields.
When I looked at the sort of aerial view, I was so surprised. And I'm sure they said it was primarily was it a hog farm or something?
Hog farm.
So I do think that with specific farms, they specialise in different things, don't they? Like a milk, I don't know what it's called,
dairy farm.
Dairy farm, that's the one, not a milk farm. But this was a hog farm. And I think that when those two got together, when Todd and Amy actually moved in together, I think she did start getting more involved in the farm side of it, because obviously we know she worked at the hospital previously.
Yes.
But it makes sense for it to be sort of a family thing, doesn't it, with the
And
farm?
it is intense, isn't it? So I think if your other half's getting up, I mean, I can't say I'd be the same, but if they're getting up at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to start the day, she probably thought like, oh, well, there's a lot of work to be done. We both will do this.
It's like what we were saying earlier. I'm like, I don't want to get up at that time in the morning. I'm tired.
Thank you. You do what you want. I'm going to stay right here.
Yeah, I'm not getting up to mow fields.
How you would want to leave, I don't know, and go and feed piglets over staying in bed with me.
To be fair, I probably would get up if I was feeding piglets.
Oh, I thought you were going to say if I was in bed with you. To be fair, I'd probably get up.
I'd probably get up and go and feed some pigs. Not just you, Beth, anyone.
But yeah, so they had built this life together, and Amy did then leave her job within healthcare and work full-time on the farm. I say full-time, but they then did go on to have 3 children. So she was then, parenting and helping to work on the farm, which again is probably more flexible.
And not only that, you've got the parenting, you've got the farm work, and then you've also got the housework added into it, haven't you?
Yeah.
And sort of running the house. So I think Amy's job primarily was sort of the kids and the home, the housework, which in itself,
as they call it in America.
In itself is a
job.
A job in
more than a full-time job.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned, the couple had 3 children, and it was one of her children that had actually found her. So it was a 13-year-old son who was called Tristan, and he'd actually come across his mother in the barn.
He'd been helping as well, so he'd been helping, obviously at 13 years old. He'll be sort of learning the trade, won't he?
Yeah.
So he'll be very familiar with the farm, and from what I could gather, he was out helping his dad in one of the barns, and then eventually came across his mom. But that's awful, isn't it? For a 13-year-old to come across a parent like that, you just think they're going to be, that image is going to stay with them, isn't it? Forever.
Yeah, absolutely traumatised.
And then being the one in the back of the car when your mum's bleeding.
And you physically can't do anything really, can you? So if we go back to the hospital for a minute, at this point, Amy has been declared deceased. And as I mentioned, the medical director for A&E obviously knew Amy really well. And he'd been told that it was this freak accident due to the injuries from her falling on the corn rake. He was actually also a medical examiner, so he wanted to check this account for himself.
Yeah, you would do though, wouldn't you? I think it's always good to have a second opinion on something like this to double check.
So he had a look, and this corn rake that was referenced, I believe it was actually brought to the hospital as well.
Right.
Whether or not it was was it brought to the post-mortem? I think it was brought to the post-mortem. Either way, this corn rake that was involved in the accident had 4 prongs that we've mentioned. They were quite spade apart.
Yeah.
And splayed.
Is that what it is?
You're
the better. Right, you're the wordy one.
So it had 4 different prongs. However, the kind of first thing that they noticed was that Amy had 6 puncture wounds. Now, this would have meant that logically, Amy would have had to have fallen on the rake, be completely impaled, and then effectively lift herself off the rake.
Yeah, pull it out of her. Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
In order to get these 6 puncture wounds. She was found face down, but the puncture wounds had actually gone all the way through because they were coming kind of out of her side and of her back. So this straight away rang alarm bells.
Yeah.
Go on. What is it?
Suspicious. It's very suspicious.
Very suspicious.
I did read though somewhere that Amy had previously had surgery not that long ago.
4 days prior.
So I thought like had she had surgery and then like when you're taking medication and maybe she'd not eaten enough or something had happened and she was like sort of woozy and she'd fallen, but then that doesn't explain why or how someone could fall on a rake, pull it out of themselves, get back up and fall on it again.
It's just
not making sense.
So they actually then called for a post-mortem to be done. And at that point, it was a woman called Kelly Cruz that was requested to conduct an autopsy. So we'll talk about the autopsy in a minute, but at that stage, the police are then involved. Obviously, there was an officer that had come out to the family farm in the first place, but now they are wanting to obviously get accounts from Todd and Tristan, the son, as to what had actually happened. So if we talk about what their accounts were of that day.
I feel like this is so sensitive as well in terms of especially the son, because you're bringing him in to find out what's happened. He probably don't want to talk about it. He probably don't want to remember it, with him being so young.
They need the information as quickly as possible.
But as sensitively as possible as well.
And yet you don't want to be...
I know they do have specialist people, don't they, that interview children. I'm guessing in this case he was still... classed as a child,
but again, are they even are they even roping people in like that at this stage, or are they just asking them for their account? Because either way, it's still as difficult for them to recall. But I wonder whether...
Yeah, I didn't think of that actually, as it got to the stage where these specialists are being called in.
Yeah. Or are they just trying to get a picture of what's happened?
Yeah.
So when questioned or asked what happened, Todd stated that Amy, Tristan and himself were all preparing for a new piglet delivery. There was 2 huge barns. They looked like they were...
When you say huge,
vast.
I can't even put them into perspective from what I was looking like. I couldn't even...
No.
It probably, to me, it looked like the length of a football pitch.
Yeah, like like a warehouse size, I would say. So they are expecting this delivery of piglets and they're preparing in the barns. And Tristan, the son, actually noticed that his mum was kind of almost stopping what she was doing for a minute and steadying herself. And he asked if she was okay. And at that point, she did say that she was feeling dizzy. So Tristan had said, well, stop what you're doing, Mum, don't carry on. And then about 2 or 3 minutes later, she had another one of these dizzy spells. And at that point, Todd then said, maybe you should go inside. I don't think you should carry on, because she had this outpatient medical procedure 4 days prior. So obviously they're still...
It's not long ago to be back in, doing what you're doing, is it?
Yeah, especially when it's such physical labour.
Yeah, I'm going to say even if she's not doing the heavy stuff, you're out in the barn.
Yeah.
And it's probably a long distance for even
walk.
I
did hear as well, actually, that it was the first time she'd been out.
Right, okay. So she had been recovering for the last 3 days sort of thing.
So Todd then kind of, I would say insists, but he basically says, look, you go inside, don't do any more work, but on the way back into the house, would you mind going to the red shed and just getting this pet carrier? Because again, they'd got some cats on the property and they didn't want those to be getting in the way while they were getting this delivery of piglets. So he'd said, if you can, go and get this pet carrier from the red shed, and then if you just leave it somewhere nearby, I think there was a specific place that he'd said, if you can leave it there near the office,
then he could sort it from there, sort of thing.
Yeah. So Tristan again said that he was with his dad the whole time, and they then carried on working for about an hour and a half maybe. And at that point, Todd mentioned that the pet carrier wasn't where he'd kind of asked Amy to put it. So he then said to his son Tristan, can you go to the red shed and look for your mum? Now, this is where I thought, and this does get brought into question later on, but if it was an hour and a half ago and you say, just go check your mum's all right,
she wouldn't still be there.
Into the house.
She wouldn't still be in the red shed. She would be in the house by that point, probably resting. And then if she
wasn't in the house, then I would go to the red shed.
Or you'd go to the red shed, but not to check on your mum. You'd say, go to the red shed and get me the pet carrier that your mum didn't bring you. Do you know what I mean? It's one or the other, isn't it? It's just not quite...
No. And I think if we can, I'm looking at you because Annie does all the editing, but if we can put a picture maybe in of red shed in comparison to barns, because like you said, there is quite a big distance between
I was trying
part.
to work out from looking at the aerial view maybe how long it would have taken to walk between the two. So would you say maybe at least a few minutes?
A good few minutes, I'd say. Because again, in their account, Tristan then says that he goes, does what his dad has told him, goes to the red shed. At that point, he does find his mother. He says that he went to check his mum's pulse, which is just horrific. To think that he's come across that, seen it, there would have been a...
And his first thought is to check a pulse. You'd think your first thought would be to panic and probably scream and shout for... Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
he's just so caring.
Yeah.
At that point, he does then call out for his dad. And as his dad comes over, his dad tells him to go and get the truck. So again, if you think like you're moving a truck around on the property, it's obviously a big scale.
Yeah.
So Tristan says that when he came across his mum, she was lying face down onto the rake, and that Todd then obviously came. So Todd on the call, again, I thought this was interesting. Todd on the call says that his wife was kind of in the doorway of this red shed.
Yep.
But then later on in the account, he says she was found further into the shed, and that it was because the shed was so narrow is why he'd taken the rake out of her to physically be able to manoeuvre it out of the shed. Okay. So I thought that was interesting, and I don't know whether anyone's picked up on that or whether it was just me coming up. Do you know what I mean? But I did notice that on the call he said in the doorway. Yeah. And then from the pictures,
it was more inside.
It was definitely inside.
Yeah, and I think surely, I mean, the red shed wasn't huge from what I could see, but it was a big enough shed to be able to get a rake in and out of it.
Yeah.
Even the doorway, like, because you could just turn it.
Yeah.
You've got to get a person out of there anyway, so I just don't understand how it was too big to get out of the door.
No,
I'm
not sure.
Twist it around.
Yeah.
You've got it in there.
Yeah.
It's not like a big thing of machinery,
No,
is
it wasn't at all. No, it did seem odd. So if we go back to the post-mortem now, so that's been carried out, and at post-mortem, they did find inconsistencies in this account of what had happened. Yeah. Firstly, the puncture wounds, which I've already mentioned, and just like the location of the puncture wounds, it looked to Kelly Cruz that had conducted the autopsy that someone would have had to have impaled with the corn rake once, and then at least another if not
one
two.
Time. Yeah, minimum.
Yeah, minimum.
Yeah.
And again, you can't do that yourself.
But I was thinking if there was 6 puncture holes, right, and the rake's got 4, like, did they do one with, like, obviously that gave her the 4?
Yeah.
But then you take it out, and how didn't she have another 4? Because it must have gone in within the same holes.
Yeah, but did you see the...
Or maybe not all
image?
Of them had gone in.
I think it looked like the second one, they'd probably just caught the edge of it because they were really close to kind of the edge.
So I was thinking that's too
precise
to be able to get it in again. Yeah. So because it was right towards the edge, another 2 prongs had gone in and 2 had gone to the side of her. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
But as well as that, they then found that there was bruising on her face. It looked like a chin where they'd circled on the autopsy. Her chin area, and then her arms and her knees. Okay. Which suggested that there was potentially kind of either blunt force trauma that could have signified a struggle.
I was going to say that's like a struggle has occurred.
Yeah.
And if she's fallen on a rake, who's she struggling with? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no struggle, is there?
You could maybe see injuries to the knees if she had fallen forwards.
Yeah.
But again, would there necessarily be this?
It's not a long way to fall, though, is it? Is what I'm thinking. Like, from stood up just to on your knees, if I fell to my knees, I probably wouldn't bruise, and I bruise.
And I think if you're fainting, which it would be more accidental, or you're tripping, you're not falling to your knees usually and then falling.
You're going down, aren't you?
Fall.
You're flat, yeah.
Yeah. So the post-mortem did raise further questions, and at that point an investigation was then launched.
Yeah, because it's like, I know from the start it weren't really looking like a farming accident, but now after the post-mortem you've got proof that this is most likely a murder.
Yes. So an investigation of this red shed was conducted, and interestingly there was only a really small amount of blood found at the scene.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw how little. Yeah.
I mean, I would have understood if they'd have kept the rake in there
Yeah.
because that does stop the blood flow. But the fact that they'd taken the rake out would have suggested more blood pooling around the area that she was found. But there wasn't a lot of blood, which was really...
It's odd, isn't it?
Odd, yeah. Again, this almost doesn't align with like an attack with the lack of blood, but it just didn't seem to make any sense. And there is kind of, as far as I've found, there's no kind of explanation for that at all, really.
Yeah.
So obviously at this stage, they are talking not only to Todd and Tristan, but also other members of the Mullis family and then Amy's friends, just to get a better insight into Amy's life, the couple's life, and really how this could have happened.
And I think in these situations, you always expect, as the closest people to someone who's got murdered, you expect to be brought in. So her son being, questioned, or her husband being questioned, that's actually normal, isn't it?
Yeah, standard
it's what
practice.
They always say, don't they, or question the husband first or question the wife first, so that you can either put them under suspicion or you can rule them out of the investigation.
Yeah.
So it is very normal for family to be questioned.
They did say that if this was now a murder case, they'd dealt with very, very few murders in the area. So they actually called on Iowa's Department of Criminal Investigation to assist.
Again, it's always these places, isn't it, where not much happens or not much goes on.
Yeah. But then again, I think in some cases, probably not in this one, but I do think in some cases whether or not offenders specifically pick those areas to target because they think that the police force will be less equipped to investigate.
Which is quite clever, actually, because they are less equipped to investigate, as we see in a lot of these cases.
So Amy's friends then did state quite quickly that there was trouble in their relationship between Amy and Todd, and this had been sparked by Amy cheating on Todd.
So she cheated on him a while ago.
Yes.
And she'd actually had an affair with a guy called Jerry, who was a farm manager, I think, if I believe rightly.
So she'd actually had an affair before that.
Oh.
So I'm going to now reference a specific source.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you what the source is at this stage because it's a bit of a giveaway. I'm just going to reference a source for now, but later in the episode I will reveal.
Give it away.
But according to this source, in 2013, Amy had an affair with someone that she met through work. Her and Todd then worked through counselling at the encouragement of a mutual friend and reconciled. So I'm not sure how he found out about the first affair, whether or not she came clean, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But they went through it together, came out the other side.
Right.
At that stage, it was agreed by the couple that Amy should leave her job and become a stay-at-home parent. In 2018, this was a year full of difficulties. In June, Amy then began a second affair, this time with a man called Jerry Fraser, who oversaw the farm's hog operation.
Yeah, so he was the one of the managers on the farm. I was under the impression, though, it had started up and then, she had cut it off and then it had rekindled again. So it was a little bit of a on and off again affair, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that was due to the fact that kind of the room, obviously it's a small town, small area, the rumour mill started to spiral. And she basically said, I'm going to try and get ahead of this.
Yeah.
But there were different accounts that had said that maybe Amy was more invested and saw a future with Jerry.
Yeah.
Jerry was married and had 2 children of his own.
Yeah.
So potentially for him,
because there was
wasn't as serious.
There was talks there with Jerry about Amy's friends were saying, what would you do if, Jerry doesn't leave his partner and his children and come with you. So I think they had spoke about both leaving the partners and being together, but saying it and doing it is 2 different things.
Very.
You just don't know, do you, when it comes to it?
So I think there were already rumours, and then again, according to this, Todd became suspicious of the 2 after reviewing a phone bill and noting a significant amount of contact between Amy and Jerry.
Okay.
Todd confronted Amy but stated it was just messages about activities and work. Todd even rang Jerry's wife, who assured him that nothing was going on. Wow. So again, he would have reason to believe that there potentially is something going on because of previous.
And I feel like Todd was quite a proud man as well. He was quite well known within the farming community in general.
Yeah.
And he was known as like a hard worker and a proud man. So you can imagine if these rumours are going round.
Yeah.
It is going to be like, sort of ruining his reputation. It's like tarnishing him.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how frustrated he would be getting with this as well.
Especially because they're both like forgetting the relationships that you've got with them. They're both people that work on your farm.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to then manage because they're both going to be coming into contact with each other all the time.
Yeah.
Then you've got to think about the work. Do you know what I mean?
You need someone to manage the farm.
Yeah. So it would be really difficult. So that's according to the source. There was another of Amy's friends that was interviewed, Terry Stainer, who she appeared to be one of Amy's closest friends, I would say. And Amy had referenced feeling controlled and said that it had got to the stage where he was timing when she left the house according to how long she should be while she was out. So obviously it was within this agreement between the couple that she would become a stay-at-home parent after the first affair.
Yeah.
But then I think that's a big shift anyway, from going from like quite a very professional discipline like nursing
to just being at home.
Home would be a big adjustment. And then if the level of control's then been up to such an extent that the monitoring how much time
was that like
out of the house.
Was that as if she would say like, right, I'm going shopping, and he'd say, well, to the shop it should take 10 minutes. It should take 10 minutes in there and 10 minutes to get back, sort of thing.
If you're longer than half an hour, girls. And she did actually say to Terry at some stage that she felt like a prisoner of Todd.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound like a happy or maybe without issue relationship.
It doesn't.
Clearly they've had troubles. That yes, they've worked through them, but then this level of control isn't healthy either.
It's not, and we always say we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. And I did notice that when Todd was first brought in for his interview, not questioned as a suspect or anything, just to find out what actually happened. I don't know, he was just, I've just found him a little bit like cold.
I think the way that you described it was really good, in the fact that you said he was quite a proud man.
Yeah.
Where reputation is everything.
Yeah.
So he did seem quite cold in terms of the way that he was talking about. Obviously, he's just lost his wife.
Yeah.
But there was no getting choked up when he was talking about her or their relationship. And he did make out that everything was quite
They asked him
good.
directly in the interview, what was your marriage like? And he said, yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah.
Didn't he? He openly said, I think it's good.
He said, we've got a good marriage. We spend a lot of time together because we work together on the farm.
Yeah.
So we're with each other most of the time.
All of the time, yeah.
And basically that was it.
Yeah.
Never alluded to anything, really.
And at this point, the son, Tristan, is Todd's alibi because they've been working in the barn together.
Yeah.
And when the police asked Tristan for his side of the story, they said, did you ever see your dad leave? Did you stay with him all the time? And he was like, well, yeah, he was there. He was there in the barn. I could see him. So at this point, we've got Todd that has got an alibi and Tristan who's giving him the alibi.
Yeah. It's so difficult as well, though, isn't it? For if you think of a 13-year-old boy, at that point, you would get a feel for the fact that they're kind of pitting your mum against your dad.
Yeah.
And you want to do right by both, don't you? You've just lost your mum.
Yeah.
You don't want to paint her in a bad light. Because they probably have asked whether or not mum and dad are happy as well.
Have they been arguing? Has there anything gone on in the house? But also, I thought in this case, if Tristan is doing something in the barn and he's at one end of the barn and his dad's at the other end of the barn, would you really notice if one of them
especially when you
went
you're
out
stuck
for 5
into
minutes,
doing whatever you're doing.
if you're distracted by what you're doing, and if you're 13-year-old, I'm guessing they get quite enthralled with what they're doing.
Yeah.
were they together the entire time, or what about when they needed to go to the loo? Did one stop and go to the loo? Like, even little things like that you'd have to ask a 13-year-old directly. So they'd say, were you with him all the time? But then you could say, well, did any of you go to the toilet? And he might say, oh yeah, we went to the loo, but then obviously we're with each other again after. They might not register that's
a significant kind of period of time. Yeah. So obviously the investigation has been unfolding. Yes, Todd has got an alibi, but now there's obviously the post-mortem is huge evidence.
Yeah.
You've then got all of these other accounts of an unhappy marriage, which gives Todd motive.
Which is different to what he said. I feel like if he'd have gone into the interview and been like, yeah, you know what, we did have our difficulties, but didn't every couple.
Yeah.
We had gone through marriage counselling. A lot of people have counselling.
Yeah.
A lot of people have affairs. Like, they probably wouldn't have thought anything.
But I think for husbands that get questioned, that is quite I've seen quite a lot of interviews where they are quite defensive and they say, well, yeah, we argued, but like, it's not like no other couple argues.
Yeah.
Even if he'd have done that, that would have kind of made more sense.
Instead of purely lying about it, wasn't it? Yeah.
So at that stage, by the 28th of February 2019, so only a few months after Amy's murder, he was then arrested for the murder of his wife. And again, this was due to the possible motive and then inconsistencies, really.
But there's still no actual physical evidence that links him to it specifically, is there? This is what I was thinking when they said he got arrested. I was like, wow, that was sort of quick with not a lot of evidence.
Yeah, and it's difficult because even if they were looking for things like fingerprints or, all of the forensic elements
they would be on each other anyway.
Account for, they would absolutely be present regardless.
Yeah.
So later in 2019, the case went to trial, and unfortunately, Amy's son Tristan is a key witness in both prosecution and defence at this stage. And he was 14 at this point.
He's so hard for him, isn't it?
But you can't even imagine. I mean, just that circumstance, if you were just a 14-year-old witness of something that was unrelated kind of to your family, say you saw something I always use while you were on a bus as an example. I don't know why. But that would be daunting enough.
Never mind it being your mum and your dad.
And you now know that if your dad is convicted, he's going to prison for murder.
And I feel like you've already lost both of them, haven't you? Because your mum's been killed and your dad is on trial for the murder. So you feel like you've lost both parents.
Yeah. So he gave testimony, I believe, via video link.
Yeah, he did,
he didn't have to be in the room, which again is something, but it's still incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah.
He then did say in his testimony that he'd noticed his mum was unsteady on her feet, which he'd referenced in his first account, and that it was his dad that had insisted that she go back inside via the red shed. And again, that his dad had told him to go to the red shed to check on her.
You just think, though, don't you, in this situation, if it's, let's say, if Todd had done this, he's then sent his 13-year-old child to go and discover his mother's body.
Yeah.
Like, how...
Absolutely. Horrific.
How horrendous is that?
And you do just think that is completely selfish, because at that point it is purely and only to give you an alibi.
Yeah, exactly.
You would rather your son come across it to give you an alibi than anything else.
Yeah, and
to
mentally
make
scar
your
him for the rest of
story
life.
look more legit. Yeah, no, horrific. But then Tristan's initial account did then fall a little kind of between the cracks, because he did then say, like you mentioned, that he couldn't always have accounted for his dad's whereabouts. He said at one point he might have gone to the toilet, at another point he went to get a glass of water. And he says, for either of these instances, however many there were, it was only a period of maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So again, is that enough time for Todd to have left, committed the attack and come back again? But it does then bring this alibi into question.
And Todd would have done that, come back in, committed the murder, come back into the barn, not had any blood or anything on him to be suspicious, not be out of breath, not be acting different.
Yes.
It's quite a lot to...
And
doing that
Tristan
short
did
space of
say
time.
that his dad's mood didn't change throughout. He had no blood on him, you know.
Yeah.
So
It's an odd one, isn't it?
It would be difficult to kind of get away with. But then the testimony is now more shaky than it appeared to be in the first place.
Yeah.
They then had the deputy that was first on scene come up and give an account. So his name was Luke Thompson. He, again, reported seeing Tristan flag him down. Tristan was covered in blood, which would make sense because she was laying on him in the truck. And Todd was trying to give this account to him as to like, oh, she must have fallen over.
You'd believe your dad though, wouldn't you? If your dad's telling you something,
Yeah.
like you would believe it. And Tristan will then have thought, oh yeah, she probably did fall over. Like,
Yeah.
why is my dad's got no reason to lie to me?
No. So the defence at trial were really trying to just poke holes in the fact that Todd would have committed this murder because, again, it's all very circumstantial. So they were saying, look, yes, it could have been murder because of the post-mortem injuries. However, who's to say it was Todd?
Yeah.
Why can't it have been someone else on the farm?
Someone else snuck onto the farm. But with this, I was quite surprised at how the defence went around it because obviously Todd had said, oh, it's an accident and she's fallen on a rake, but they didn't even go with that.
No.
They went with, yeah, this is a horrific murder, but it wasn't Todd.
Yeah.
And when they said that, at first I was like, oh, that's a strange way to go around it because then your client's story is not even...
legitimate.
Yeah. That's bringing his
well, at
him
one
into
point
question.
later on, it becomes clear that Todd actually wrote to his defence lawyer while they were sat next to each other on a piece of paper and basically wrote, "What the fuck was that? Like, what the hell was that?" Because he got up and gave an account, and like you say, he was like, "Well, hang on a minute, that's
nothing what
good.
I've just said.
Yeah.
That's making me look stupid and bringing me into question in front of a jury."
Yeah, so I don't think that Todd was massively
right.
happy.
So that was something
with his
maybe
defence.
spur of the moment for the defence to do then.
Yeah. But the defence then was trying to kind of shift the potential blame towards Jerry that Amy was having an affair with.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were having an affair. He was married. He was a father of two. So there was potential motive for him not wanting this affair to come out.
Yeah.
So Jerry was actually put on the stand. And I don't think, obviously the defence were trying to push it in that direction, but I don't think anyone believed that Jerry had anything to do with it.
No, and they
He
actually
came across-
checked his phone records as well, and he weren't even anywhere near. I think he was like, I'm sure they said he was like 40 miles away.
So he was
somewhere.
45 minutes away with his son in a different town altogether. Again, the son's providing the alibi there, but it was the cell phone data that kind of proved that he was there. Now, defence claimed that, well, just because the cell phone's pinging in that area doesn't mean that he was there because he could have left his cell phone.
Yeah.
But your cell phone's not pinging unless you're using it.
Yeah.
So I still don't think the defence was great there.
I don't think the defence was great at all in general.
No.
And there was a lot of media attention. We talk sometimes about these trials in America, and they are pretty much, televised and God knows what. And this did draw a lot of attention from people.
Yeah.
And there were even like Facebook groups being set up for Todd, saying like he didn't do it.
Justice for Todd Mullis.
Justice for Todd. And there was, in one of the documentaries that I watched, there was a lady on there. And she was like, yes, I don't believe it was him. So I set up this Facebook group and we all came together. And she said like, oh yeah, it was mostly women that came and rallied round for him. And
he also lost a lot of weight before the trial. And I think, again, there's a lot of information out there about like tactics that the defence will play as to making either women that are powerful and maybe the force behind the plan, making them look dowdy. And
because he was a big guy before, he was like a big strong farmer who would have quite easily overpowered, I'd say, pretty much any woman.
Yeah.
But then at trial, he'd lost quite a lot of weight, and to me, didn't look like the
same
I say
person.
stereotypical farmer.
Yeah.
But he didn't look like he did before.
No.
And I definitely think that were tactics, because they'd look at him and the defence kept saying, "Does this look like a man that would be able to do this?" And you think, well, no, maybe not now, but when he was 4 stone heavier, he could. So I do think that was tactical.
So in these accounts of obviously witnesses on the stand, Jerry again came across really well, I think. He was completely honest about the affair. He said that they maybe met once a week, but that varied as to how often they were able to meet.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was on the farm itself. Sometimes they would get a motel and things like that. Sometimes they'd like meet up on a back road or whatever. He did say that he thought Amy was invested in the relationship, but that he was just really worried about how it would all play out. And that Amy had actually said to him on one account, if anyone or if Todd found out about this, that'd be it for me.
Yeah.
One of Amy's friends, Patricia, said that Amy absolutely saw a future with Jerry, but was still afraid of anyone finding out.
So they made it sound like quite a few people, like she was scared of Todd's reaction.
Yeah.
And previously she'd said she wanted to leave the relationship and that Todd wouldn't allow it and that he was the one who was keeping hold of her. And then you've got to think as well, in this situation, if these two have been married, she's then gone to work on his farm and it technically started off as his farm.
Yeah.
If she leaves, she could take the children, she could take half of the farm, which is half of his livelihood as well. So could that be anything to do with it? Because if she did want a divorce, like she's telling her friends, and she did want to leave him, was he scared of her taking half of the farm?
Of what was his? Yeah.
And he'd even said she didn't do, she wasn't pulling her weight around the farm. I mean, even though we know she just had surgery.
Yeah.
And she got the kids to look after and the house.
But then she is having an affair on the farm as well.
She is having an affair on the farm, yeah.
It's difficult. Amy, one of her friends that was up on the witness stand, said that she'd said she was scared of him and that if he ever found out she even wanted a divorce, that he would kill her.
Yeah.
Again, that she would disappear. When she said to Jerry that if he found out, she would disappear.
Yeah.
And one of her friends, this Terry that I mentioned earlier, that was a really close friend of hers, she turned around to Terry at one point and said, Ter, if I ever come up missing, look in our new tipper. And again, both of her friends had said, why are you staying with him? This is dangerous. You're putting yourself in danger. And Terry said on the witness stand that she felt like Todd was someone that you shouldn't mess with. That he was a threat, a legitimate threat.
And like piggybacking on that, when they'd spoke to the local community about Todd, we said that he was like well known and he was a hardworking farmer. A lot of the neighbours had actually had disputes with him, and said don't mess with him. Even when the police went to arrest him, some of the neighbours had said, "Oh, make sure you've got enough sufficient backup," and like as if there was something a little bit sinister. About him at that point.
But again, all of this is circumstantial. So we've got kind of why instruct Tristan to go specifically to the Red Shed, which we've already talked about. Like it does seem like an odd reference. You would just say, go check on your mum.
Yeah.
You wouldn't
state
go to where she was an hour and a half ago and check she's still there, even though she was only meant to be there for 5 minutes.
Yep.
Why didn't he ring 911 until they were in the truck? Why did he wait until they were in the truck?
Yep.
Why did he pull the rake out in the first place? Like again, he
There's
gives
lots of
questions, kind of reason for it.
Yeah.
He didn't kind of fight when he was accused in an interview of murdering his wife, of murdering Amy. He seems kind of taken aback and perplexed, but he's not like what like I would be. I've always said it's my biggest fear, being accused of something I haven't done.
You'd be like,
I would be like,
I didn't do it.
What? Like, no, please, honestly.
Yeah, I didn't do this. But he never once said the words, resigned. I didn't do it.
Well, he did say
he said something
along the lines of, you're talking as if it was me and I didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, but that one line. But if you're in the middle of an interview and someone's accusing you of murder, I'd be like, no, seriously, it wasn't me. Like, I didn't do this.
But then on the other hand, you think the more that, like, doth protest too much, like...
You just can't win, can you, either way? But I think I would have said more than what he said, in general.
There was also some CCTV footage that was brought into question.
Yep.
So they'd got CCTV on the farm. and there was some or a camera that pointed towards this red shed. So they were like, okay, great, we can now see whether or not Todd passes the shed, how much time has elapsed, that kind of thing.
And not even that, if it's not Todd, who else is it?
Yeah.
And we will find them coming into the farm on the
Yes.
CCTV as well.
Yeah.
So either way, we're going to rule him out.
A good
or,
piece of evidence.
Yes.
However,
the
footage had been deleted the day prior.
Yeah.
Again, this was brought into question. Todd actually went on the witness stand for up to 3 hours in his own defence, which is a risky manoeuvre anyway. Yeah. And they asked him about the footage, and he blamed his cats. So he said that where they put their antennae for the cameras was up on one of the buildings' roofs, and that the cats, as the weather gets nicer, like to find a nice sunny spot, and that this specific part of the roof,
that exact spot
was, it must have been where the cats wanted to go, and they'd knocked the antennae off.
Yeah, but then it came back on later.
Yes, which had then... And then he says that family and friends had said, oh, is your CCTV footage working? At which point he went to check and said, oh, goodness.
Oh, no, the cats have knocked it off.
It hasn't been working. And he said that it hadn't been running for a week prior.
Yeah.
But there was evidence to suggest that it had been deleted just a day prior.
Yeah.
So, again, that sent shaky in itself. Other digital forensics were from Todd's iPad searches.
I thought this was really stupid.
Yeah. So there were searches on the iPad, and there was actually reams and reams of searches that the jury actually had to work through. But the three main ones that were highlighted were... What happens to cheaters in history? Thrill of the Kill, which was a series based on murder, basically. And another search that was killing unfaithful women.
And there wasn't, like Beth said, these are the main ones.
Yeah.
But the others were searches around how much time you get for... killing someone. What was there was quite a few, weren't there? Killing, cheating women was the theme of all of this. But he denied searching for any of them, didn't he?
So
when he was questioned.
Said, oh no, that wasn't me.
Yeah, but then who is it?
Well, he claimed that it could have been Amy, his wife. Now, I can understand if you're really panicking and you've got major guilt, that you could maybe Google what happens to cheaters or cheaters in relationships, maybe something like that. But why on earth would Amy Google killing unfaithful women?
Yeah, on her husband's
iPad. It makes no sense.
No.
Make it make sense.
Yeah.
And so he just said, well, other people can use the iPad as well. It wasn't me. Again, in his defence, he said that the reason he pulled the corn rake out was to get out of the shed, and the reason that he didn't ring 911 was because he was a doer, and that his first thought was to just rush her to the hospital, and it didn't dawn on him to ring 911 until he then realised that she was unresponsive.
And then here is where the 911 call comes into question as well. So there was quite a lot of controversy around this because the lady who was prosecuting, I thought she was quite good, but she did base a lot of her evidence on this 911 call.
Yeah.
And it actually came in from someone, like these internet sleuths, who had listened to the 911 call and rang in and said, have you heard what he said on the 911 call? So I think the officers were like, well, yeah, we listened to it, but what? And he said, at this point, this is what he said, something else in it. And it was under his breath. So the police went back and listened to the tape again. And we know that things can be enhanced. But I've got to say, when I first listened to this, it didn't even cross my mind that this was said.
No.
But then after they tell you what it was, you think, oh, could I hear that?
What was that?
What is it? So on the 911 call, apparently under his breath, he said, cheating whore. Then a few seconds later, he says, go to hell, cheating whore.
Yeah.
So I couldn't hear it. But then when they pointed it out and they went into it and they slowed it down and they did whatever.
Yeah.
I thought I could hear it, but then have I heard it because they've told me?
Yes, they've like put it into your head.
And he was saying 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously 4, whore, similar.
Okay, yeah.
So he was saying, when he was saying 4 under his breath and he was whatever.
Right.
And then he was waiting and he'd said something else. It was sort of like, he obviously denied that he'd said that.
Yeah.
But this was a main piece of evidence, what they'd sort of focused the whole, the whole prosecution on. And even the Facebook group then, like all these...
Oh, yeah, of course.
All the
supporters.
women were like, we couldn't hear anything.
Yeah.
And then they started posting about it.
It's difficult as well, isn't it? Because, like, yes, it's under your breath, so would anyone else have heard it? But also, would he be saying something like that in front of his son?
Yeah, and he said he was saying 1, 2, 3, 4, and then in between, obviously doing the compressions, he got to 4, and under his breath he says she's cold. So it was actually unclear what was said in the call, and I don't think you could have really based
a lot on it. Even when you kind of peel that bit of audio out, I still don't think it becomes clear enough that you could say categorically one way or the
yes
other.
or no. Yeah.
So again, just more circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, it is, isn't it, at this point? So the trial lasted a week, and Todd was actually found guilty of murder in the first degree. And I know you've got some sort of comments from the jurors, haven't you?
So some of the jurors, I saw interviews with 2 separate jurors that didn't want to be named. They both said that there was a definite split with... When they first went in to deliberate, it was half and half.
Right.
Half said there wasn't enough forensic evidence. Half said they were pretty dead certain that it was Todd.
Okay.
Some jurors thought that the forensic evidence was too weak.
Yep.
But again, it was just down to how circumstantial it all was.
I would agree on the forensic evidence being weak.
Yeah, I think one of the women that was interviewed, she basically said her opinion overall came down to the fact that they couldn't come up... Well, overall, this is why he was found guilty, because they couldn't come up with any other reasonable explanation for the events the injuries. Yeah. Like, how else would it have happened? Yes, some miraculous, like, stranger could have come in, but again, was that realistic?
Yeah.
So, yeah, he got first degree murder. And again, Todd's reaction was just, he kind of gently shook his head. But that was it. He was still very cold at that point.
Because I think he thought, right, from this point, I'm going to fight it anyway.
Yeah.
Because the defence wanted to go for a mistrial because they said that the 911 evidence from the call was misleading, because the prosecution had actually said the words of what they thought were said.
Yeah,
which
rather
then
than
had
leaving
been... Because if they'd have said, right, in this, there is something that some people can hear. We want to see if you can hear it yourself, if you analyse it. But she said, right, at this point, this is what was said. Yeah. Can you hear it?
Leading question, my honour.
Yeah.
Your honour.
Yeah, my honour.
My honour. So he then claimed his defence lawyers didn't ever state that it was an accident. They basically said it was a murder.
Yeah.
So he'd actually submitted for a new trial before he was even sentenced.
Yeah. That's why I think he didn't react much, because he'd already started the proceedings. Yeah. I think he sort of knew what was going to come of it. But the judge did actually refuse to throw out the guilty verdict due to the 911 call.
So his motion was denied, but they did let him kind of make a statement. And in the statement, he didn't do himself any favours.
No, I don't think he did either.
He said, I just want to say I didn't do it. He said, I thought it was guilty until... Proven, and then until he went to say guilty until proven innocent. So he basically just said he was guilty. And yes, there's a slip of the tongue. Yeah. But usually it would be the opposite way around.
Innocent until proven guilty. It's almost as if he's
got the word guilty in his head. But then you have just been accused of murder.
And you have just been found guilty, haven't you?
Yeah, so it's a really tricky one. But you just think, oh God.
You just think, shut up. Yeah. Just don't say anything and it would have been better.
So he did receive life in prison without parole. As we said, that initial motion was denied. I keep mentioning this source that I've been referencing. That was actually a an appeals of conviction, which was filed in 2022.
Yeah.
So that was filed in February 2022, and they had to give all of the facts and information at the beginning of the court documents. I've been reading the court documents. So all of those kind of extracts are the information that's outlined in that document.
Yeah.
But obviously, if I'd have said it was from the appeal, then we'd have known.
We'd have given the whole thing away.
So the latest update is actually very recent. So Monday, the 24th of February 2025, in Delaware County District Court, there was an application for post-conviction relief that started. So this is almost like a mini trial in itself, where Mullis is asking for a whole new trial. During closing arguments, Todd's attorney, Tara Thompson, states that there's no doubt that the 2019 trial was unfair. So they're not saying that it was wrong. They're just saying that it was unfair in the way that the evidence was presented.
Which, in a way, I think I probably would agree with.
Yeah, based on the defence that he was given.
Because when I was researching this, I did find quite a lot of footage from the actual courtroom. So you can basically see what's going on in there, can't you? You can watch what's happening.
Yeah. So by the end of April, I think it was, or was it early April? I know April time, I think maybe the 6th, is the number in my head, but we know that I'm not good at numbers, was when their last kind of documents had to be submitted. Yeah. And I can't find, as of kind of today when we're filming, I can't find anything that says what the outcome of this post-conviction relief is.
I think it's too soon.
Yeah.
Because if it got submitted sort of 5th, 6th or April, we're filming now on, the 5th?
Yeah.
It's a month later.
Yeah.
So I think that they'll not get released until a couple of months later at least.
But it is kind of back in American news at the minute because of that. Which coincidentally, we didn't know when we decided to pick this case.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think it is difficult. To me, it seems most likely that it was Todd. But I do think based on that trial, as we said at the beginning, I would not have wanted to be a juror because it was just too circumstantial. Yeah, I do think it was him, but I just don't think the evidence is enough. No. And it is just odd, the lack of blood. There's so much in it that is just confusing. So much you could bring into question, isn't there? Yeah. Which I'm guessing if it does get another trial, they will bring all this into question. A second trial would be interesting in this case, just to see the difference. Yeah. But there you go. I just feel sorry for the family. Obviously there are 2 other children involved. Tristan, I can't imagine, and all the kids have lost their mum and dad. And then just Amy's family, she seemed like she was incredibly intelligent, really hardworking, popular, lots of friends, and the ripple effect that Amy's death will have had on so many people will be huge. And the family have still not got closure all these years later. No. So thank you ever so much for watching, listening, however you consume consumed our voices today. And we will see you next week for another episode. Bye. Take care.